You know what's wrong with you?
What?
You're an American. You want it to happen now.
Now!
Dad, what are your thoughts on Trump and Biden?
True international effort to pressure.
Well, first of all, Trump galvanizes folk. Folks don't just think about him. They either or whatever. They're either totally for him or they're totally against him. Yes. And the point is, they don't always know why. I know you speak
on both sides.
No, I'm talking about. Talking about Trump right now.
No. You said people don't know why. I'm saying why they don't like him or why they do like him. Or are you saying?
Oh, it's both.
Okay.
Yeah.
Elaborate, because I know why I like him.
Because it's awesome.
He's very clear.
I would bomb the shit out of him.
About what he's for and what he's against, and that's very refreshing. He doesn't do political speak. He doesn't speak, at least as much as we can tell, just to be appreciated or what have you. Though he's normal enough, he wants to be appreciated. He wants to be applauded. But anyway, and as far as Mr. Biden is concerned, he really seemed like a non-entity, sort of I can't say he's a non-person, but you can't help but think that he's sort of standing in for an interest or a person or a cause or something rather than representing it himself.
I say give the nomination to Joe. He names me VP.
I would say he has sociopathic tendencies. There's no empathy or morality, or he's just an empty shell that can represent a body.
But this standard is not a measure of how we can evaluate the condition of our society. It cannot measure the health of our children, the quality of our education, the joy of their play.
Yet the gross national product does not allow for the health of our children, the quality of their education, or the joy of their play.
Let us pledge that our generation of Americans will pay any price, bear any burden, accept any challenge, and meet any hardship to secure the blessings of prosperity and the promise of opportunity for our children. We shall pay any price, bear any burden, meet any hardship, support any friend, oppose any foe to assure the survival and the success of liberty. And I started thinking as I was coming over here, why is it that Joe Biden is the first in his family ever to go to a university?
Why am I the first Kinnick in 1,000 generations to be able to get to university?
Why is it that my wife, who's sitting out there in the audience, is the first in her family to ever go to college?
Why is Glenys the first woman in her family in 1,000 generations to be able to get to university?
No, it's not because they weren't as smart. It's not because they didn't work as hard. It's because they didn't have a platform upon which to stand.
Does anybody really think that they didn't get what we had because they didn't have the talent or the strength or the endurance or the commitment? Of course not. It was because there was no platform upon which they could stand.
And an ideology that he doesn't believe in. I mean, that's a funny thing. When you look at these politicians, particularly in the Democrat Party, who have been for 30 or 40 years, well, you're talking about some of the most racist individuals on the planet. You know, you go back to the early 70s and stuff like that. I mean, golly.
I think the two-party system, although
my Democratic colleagues won't like me saying this. I think the two-party system is good for the South and good for the Negro, good for the black in the South. Other than the fact that they still call me boy, I think they've changed their mind.
The Democrat Party was not what it is now.
But you know, you can't think about these guys apart from thinking about a battle that's going on in America, and more than one interest talks about there's a battle for the soul of America, and I certainly subscribe to that. And it's going on in the heavenlies. It's going on in the spirit realm as well as the physical realm. And I know the Bible speaks of all the seed that has been sown will come to maturity at the same time. Good seed, bad seed, it's all coming together right now. And whether this will result in civil war or not, I don't know. I hope not. But there is a battle, and we can't draw back from it. And I think Christians have been surprised to hear certain leaders like Rick Joyner. He was the first one I heard speak of it, that maybe Christians may need to get a sword.
Thank God for the present church. I'm talking about the form of the church. More how we meet, how we do things, the structure will not make it through what is coming.
Sell a garment and get a sword, or we'd say a gun. Get a gun today. And that seems so alien to our, thinking over the last 40, 50 years. But it's certainly not alien to our thinking from the beginning of this country during, the fight for independence from England. Being Christian and being a soldier just went together.
I mean, it really has been. I mean, always, I would think. Mm-hmm. I mean, Christians have had to fight just like anybody's had to fight. Both, and then I know there's certain fractions that, I think Amish and things, they're pacifists, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Room's starting to spin real fast because of gayness.
Well, you're pacifist until...
Well, the thing about it, they may be pacifists, but it takes the others to allow them to have that luxury.
Right. And your pacifism is stacked on top of dead bodies, And, all right. It was just a friend of mine asked, I'd be interested to hear what your dad thinks about Biden or Trump. And, of course, he said this before the election. I said, well, I'll ask him. I can tell you right now, his views are the same as mine. For the most part, we share the same thoughts and everything. There is something to the low information voter is really they're dangerous. Dangerous in that their vote means as much as anybody who knows what's going on. So it can nullify an intelligent vote with a non-intelligent vote. And that's a little bit, and then people are talking about, particularly young people, and this happens every time, that they wish we would just do a, general election versus the collegiate college,
a college of
electoral college.
Electoral college, yeah.
And that's just stupid. It's like, well, okay, well, you're a moron. Not a moron. I hate that, but. What you're doing is you're saying your vote doesn't matter as much, because right now everyone's in the way, everybody's vote in the country carries weight. Protection of minorities is what it is. Kansas is a minority compared to California, and this gives Kansas some weight. Mm-hmm. It means your vote matters in Kansas, and why you want to give that away, I don't understand. They just really haven't thought it through, and they're not taught that. In school anymore. And I think that's probably by design, which he would praise yours too.
Okay. There's been the defection of education to the left.
Well, it's just so strange that these sort of courses and these sort of ideologies are thriving in universities. And it's really disconcerting to someone who has children. And you know that your children are going to go there and they're going to be exposed
them to trade
these
school.
ideas.
You know, I think that.
Wow,
I think
a
that
guy
the
who used to teach at
universities-
Harvard just says send him to trade school.
I think the universities. I think the universities. I think you can make a reasonable case that the universities do more harm than good now.
But this is where the spiritual side of things comes in, and it has to be a battle. And part of the reason why followers of Trump, like sincere followers of Trump, at this matter, at this point, are wanting to hang on to see about the clarification of the vote.
According to the witnesses, the Republican observers, there is a lady who has blonde braids who comes out to announce we're going to stop counting. Everyone go home. And in fact, we see that. What happens is everyone clears out. So what you're going to see, look at the ladies in yellow. You'll see that they will begin just sitting still, doing nothing, ostensibly not working, because after all, they said they're going to stop counting. They will wait until the witnesses over there in that roped off area, the press and the observers, leave the room. Then you'll see them move into action and begin scanning ballots. Once everyone is gone, coast is clear, they are going to pull ballots out from underneath a table. There you go. So now they're going to start pulling these ballots out from under this table. This table, the black one, was placed there by the lady with the blonde braids. Okay, so 821. You'll notice the table's not there at all. Here it comes. There's the table going in that we're talking about where the ballots were obscured. That lady who's moving it is the lady with the blonde braids. She's dressed differently in the morning, so it took us a while to figure out that's the same person that you see at night with the blue apron on who's yelling for everyone to leave and who stays behind to help tabulate ballots after they've all left. Yeah, I saw 4 suitcases come out from underneath the table. So he just pulled one out. So what are these ballots doing there, separate from all the other ballots? And why are they only counting them whenever the place is cleared out with no witnesses? These machines can process about 3,000 ballots an hour. You have multiple machines there, and they're there for 2 hours. So you do the math. We believe that could easily be, and probably is certainly, beyond the margin of victory in this race. Because if it's only 3 scanners working for 2 hours, right, that's 18,000 ballots that went through. And so if we were to sit here for the next 2 hours, what we would see is that this operation just goes on and on and on.
You know, to get an authentic count in all the states that where the vote is being disputed. And it's because, well, you know, from a spiritual standpoint, we feel like God's not done with America. And if the Biden forces are declared to be a winner, then everything spiritual, at least from the Christian perspective, you can kind of kiss it goodbye, at least for a while. And I don't think God is done. And that's why it was so that he's done with America. I don't think he's done with Trump. And that's why a lot of followers of Trump don't want to let go of that hope. They feel like, hey, it will vindicate what God is all about.
Yes. Yeah. I read this morning that 30% of all Democrats think the election was rigged. 75 to 80% of all Republicans think the election was rigged. Now, that's so interesting. 30% of all Democrats think the election was rigged. Now, if 20% of the Republicans don't think it was rigged, or I think maybe 20% of those, I don't know how that works, because then it's not that big a deal. But the fact that there are any Democrats that think the election was rigged is weird. And it's just, we'll see. We'll see. I keep waiting for, and we'll see. This probably won't go out till next Wednesday at the earliest. And, You know, Sidney Powell, I just read this morning, it's coming tomorrow, it's coming tomorrow, it's coming tomorrow. And I will remain faithful until Trump leaves office. But it's time to, let's move on. Let's get on with this.
Yes.
Give me something to pray for. I'm praying for it, but don't bullshit me. You know, don't let me know how to pray, how to fight, how to do everything. You know, does that make sense?
Yeah, well, yes, but I appreciate what Dutch Sheets had to say about this. That they felt like he felt like God had called a bunch of them together, and he said for them to be assembled on such short notice, on maybe 3 days' notice, to gather 1,000 people together in this little town in Pennsylvania.
In Coudersport, Pennsylvania.
And there were 30 leaders from, I don't know whether they came from across the world, certainly from all across America. 3 days' notice to get this thing done, and then they lined up, he says, possibly between 400 and 500,000 people praying for this event.
My faith was, and my request to the Lord was, Lord, give us tens of thousands of people that will join us through media, through online, not necessarily maybe all of them live, but before everyone is finished watching this and agreeing in prayer with us, give us tens of that thousands. I thought, Lord, if we could just get 40, 50,000 people to agree in prayer from there, because of what you're saying, it would just be amazing. And as it turns out, we're up close to 400,000 now.
And this is incredible that something like this could happen on such short notice. And he's just talking about how ultimately he says that from a dream that someone shared with him, God says, I am never late.
I am not late.
That's right.
And so I right along, I've taken the position that a lot of stuff has just simply got to boil to the surface.
That's good. Yeah.
And
you're right. And I just, need to be reminded of that all the time. I think part of me wants it now.
I want it now.
Just because I'm so curious about it.
Mm-hmm.
I just want it to happen now. But I'm going to keep going on. No matter
you know what's wrong with you?
What?
You're an American. You want it to happen now.
Now!
Maybe.
Yeah. Well, most of us are that way. We like for a thing to happen now.
Well, there's uneasiness about, and it needs not be for myself. I'm going to not change and do the same thing I've been doing no matter who gets elected. And I'm assuming Trump got elected. I'm confessing that and everything. My point is, it won't change me.
Ain't nothing going to change me. I'm still going to continue to work hard, push my messages, do what I have to do.
But there is uneasiness about the country I love very much.
Yeah, it's still going to make it tough.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
I'm proud of her and embarrassed of her at the same time. I'm proud of I'm proud of one, the certain elements of it, the Christian aspect, the ability to fight, the way we produce winners and all kinds of stuff. But this new thing developing, that's a product of the takeover of this neo-Marxism or what do they call it? It's not neo-Marxism, it's postmodernism that's taken over our schools. I'm not proud of that. Are you familiar with what postmodernism is?
Well, I've heard the term along, but
we just need to look up the definition.
So I want to recommend a book first to everyone here. It's called Explaining Postmodernism, and it's by a gentleman named Stephen Hicks. And you need to understand postmodernism because that's what you're up against, and you're up against it far more than you know or think. And it's a much more well-developed and pervasive, pernicious, nihilistic intellectually attractive doctrine than has yet come to public realization. It absolutely dominates the humanities and increasingly the social sciences in the universities. And what's happening, you see, someone once said, who unfortunately I can't remember, it might have been Friedrich Nietzsche, said that everybody is the unconscious exponent of a dead philosopher. And fortunately, the postmodern philosophers, most of them are dead, so that's a good thing. But that doesn't mean that their words aren't continually being spoken by people who are following in their wake, let's say. And it's not like any given person is absolutely possessed, say, by the spirit of postmodernism, because often they're not educated enough to know all the details about what it is that has them in their grip. But if you get 20 of them together, and they're all 5% influenced by the postmodernist ethos, you basically have the spirit of the mob that's a mouthpiece for that particular philosophical doctrine. And if you understand the doctrine, then you understand why things are progressing the way that they're progressing. And so I'm going to tell you a little bit about the doctrine, because it's not optional to understand this. It's absolutely crucial to understand this. You can't underestimate the power of ideas and also the power of words, of course, because ideas are expressed in words. But you see, the postmodernists completely reject the structure of Western civilization. And I mean completely. So I can give you an example in one term. Jacques Derrida, who's head trickster for the postmodernist movement, regarded Western culture, let's call it the patriarchy, as phallogocentric. Okay, so phallo comes from phallus, P-H-A-L-L-O. And so that's the insistence that what you see in Western culture is the consequence of a male-dominated, oppressive, self-serving society. And we might say, well, you know, societies do tend to be self-serving, and people in power do tend to act in their best interests, but a tendency is not an absolute, and that's one of the things that needs to be considered continually. There are no shortage of flaws in the manner in which we've structured our society. And compared to any hypothetical utopia, it's an absolutely dismal wreck. But compared to the rest of the world and the plight of other societies throughout the history of mankind, we're doing pretty damn well, and we should be happy to be living in the society that we're living in. So the first thing that you might want to note about postmodernism is that it doesn't have a shred of gratitude. And there's something pathologically wrong with a person who doesn't have any gratitude, especially when they live in what so far is the best of all possible worlds. And so if you're not grateful, you're driven by resentment. And resentment is about the worst emotion that you can possibly experience apart from arrogance. Resentment, arrogance, and deceit. There's an evil triad for you. And if you're bitter about everything that's happening around you, despite the fact that you're bathed in wealth, then there's something absolutely wrong with you. You know, the black community in the United States is the 18th wealthiest community, 18th wealthiest nation on the planet. Now, that doesn't mean there isn't such a thing as relative poverty, and relative poverty matters. It's an important political economic issue, and it's very, very difficult to deal with. But absolute wealth matters too, and Western societies have been absolutely remarkable in their ability to generate and distribute wealth, as you can tell by just looking around and taking a brief bit of consideration for the absolute miracle that even a building like this represents. So you have to educate yourself about postmodernism. Okay, so here's what the postmodernists believe. They don't believe in the individual. That's the logos part. Western culture is phallogocentric. Logo is logos. That's partly the Christian word, but it's also partly the root word of logic, okay? They don't believe in logic. They believe that logic is part of the process by which the patriarchal institutions of the West continue to dominate and to justify their dominance. They don't believe in dialogue. The root word of dialogue is logos again. They don't believe that people of goodwill can come to consensus through the exchange of ideas. They believe that that notion is part of the philosophical substructure and practices of the dominant culture. So the reason they don't let people who they don't agree with speak on campus is because they don't agree with letting people speak. You see, it's not part of the ethos. Okay, so what else do they believe and not believe? They believe that since you don't have an individual identity, your fundamental identity is group fostered. And that means that you're basically an exemplar of your race, hence white privilege, or you're an exemplar of your gender or your sex or your ethnicity, or you're an exemplar of however you can be classified so that you are placed in the position of victim against the oppressor, because that's the game. And it's a post-Marxist sleight of hand, right? The old Marxist notion was that the world was a battleground between the bourgeoisie and the proletariat, and that failed to have any philosophical or ethical standing, that argument, after the working class actually saw its standard of living massively elevated as a consequence of Western corporate democracy, Western free enterprise democracy, and also as a consequence of the revelations of everything terrible that had happened in every bloody country that ever dared to make.
This is good, very good.
Yeah, I'm glad. Good. Yeah, any questions? Do you have? I've been watching Jordan Peterson for a while, so he talks about postmodernism all the time. But we'll see what else he talks about.
Make equity and the Marxist communist dogma part of their fundamental structure, right? And nothing but murderousness and oppression. And so by the 1970s, it was evident that that game was up. The postmodernist Marxists just basically pulled a sleight of hand and said, okay, if it's not the poor against the rich, it's the oppressed against the oppressor. We'll just redivide the subpopulations in ways that make our bloody philosophy continue in its movement forward, and that's where we're at now. And so for the postmodernists, the world is a Hobbesian battleground of identity groups. They do not communicate with one another because they can't. All there is a struggle for power. And if you're in the predator group, which means you're an oppressor, then you better look out, because you're not exactly welcome, and neither are your ideas. So that's what you're up against. I would say it's time for conservatives to stop apologizing for being conservatives. You know, and you don't apologize to these people. That's a big mistake. Apology, they read apology as an admission of guilt. You don't apologize and you don't back down. You young people that are out there who are university students, you need to take over the student unions. You need to take them back, because they're absolute snake pits, and they have been since the 1990s. And with regards to the universities, I thought at one point that the best thing to do would be to cut their funding by 25% and let them fight amongst themselves for the remnants, because it would force the universities to decide exactly what's important and what isn't. So I would say the humanities and much of the social sciences has turned into a postmodern neo-Marxist playground for radicals. The scholarship is terrible. 80% of humanities papers aren't cited once. And so what that means is that they write papers for each other and they sell them to libraries, and that's how the publishers make their money. And no one reads them, but the publishers can print them because the libraries have to buy them, and they're buying them with your tax money. And so all of you who are sitting here are funding a postmodern, radical, neo-Marxist agenda that has its roots in the university, and your tax money is going towards that. And if you want proof of that, you just go online and look at the websites, especially of disciplines like women's studies, which is pathological right to the core. But it's not just women's studies, it's all the ethnic studies groups. It's anthropology, it's sociology, it's social work, and most of all, it's education. And OISE, for example, in Ontario, is perhaps, apart from the Ontario Human Rights Commission, the most dangerous institution in Canada. It should be defunded. It's as simple as that. They don't do the research they purport to do. They're not interested at all in education. They're interested in the indoctrination of people as young as they can get their hands on, so to speak. Now we need to figure out, our society needs to figure out how to stop shunting public tax money to radical left-wing activists. If we were doing that for radical right-wing activists, there would be an absolute storm. But it's happened incrementally since the 1960s, and it needs to stop. So that's partly what the conservatives, not only conservatives, but also liberals, true liberals in the English sense, are up against. I mean, what's happened also as a consequence of this postmodern neo-Marxist intellectual invasion is that the center keeps moving. It's moved way to the right now. So if you're a classic liberal, you've become a conservative. And so for all of you who are interested in pursuing the conservative agenda, there's a lot of classic liberals that you could be talking to. And then finally, with regards to talking to young people, you finally have something to sell to them, you know. It's not easy to sell conservatism to young people because they want to change things, and that's not what conservatives want to do. They want to maintain things. Well, now you've got something to sell to young people. You can sell them freedom of speech, and you can sell them responsibility. The left is selling them rights. You can sell them responsibility. And I can tell you, because I've received many letters of the sort that Gad was talking about. Young people are absolutely starving for someone to provide them with a sense of responsibility and say, look, here's something worth living for, man. You know, you can find meaning in life with freedom, but freedom is a chaotic sort of meaning, right? And freedom isn't the sort of thing that makes people happy. It's the sort of thing that makes people troubled, because freedom expands your series of choices, and that makes you nervous and uncertain. So, but responsibility is another, not to say that that's a bad thing, it's a good thing, but it requires that you shoulder the responsibility of the freedom. But responsibility per se is what gives your life meaning, genuine meaning in the face of suffering. And young people are really, they're starving for that. I've been teaching young people for 30 years, and mostly what I've been teaching them about is responsibility. It's like you're heirs to a great tradition. It's not perfect, obviously, but comparatively, there's nothing else like it that's ever been produced, and it represents a tiny minority of the human polities, most of which are run by murderous, antisocial, psychopathic thugs. And that's seriously. And so what kind of alternative is that? We've got this beacon of freedom and wealth in the West that works, although it doesn't work perfectly. And one of the responsibilities of young people is to find out what's at the core of that, the great core of that, the paramount importance of the individual and the divinity of speech, man. That's something to sell. It's what our whole culture is predicated on. All right, well, I should stop there. So thank you very much for the invitation.
I'd say he's preaching.
Yeah.
Yeah. Golly, he just needs to give an altar call. But I thoroughly enjoyed that, and he's so right on. He's so full of his subject.
Yes.
My goodness. Yes.
Yes, and you know, that's. I should have you watch some of the interviews with. You ever watch any interviews with him?
No.
Well, he gets attacked by these people, and I have no idea why people think they can take him on. His knowledge is overwhelming.
Women, it's not about masculinity per se. You must know that.
I read the American Psychological Association guidelines for the treatment of boys and men, and I know perfectly well that this is no straw man.
You know, people will say, "Well, I'm not an expert," and he said, "Well, I am."
I'm actually quite an expert on it.
Okay.
We can watch some of those for fun. They're fun to watch. And this is, they're the most satisfying things because people attack him for being anti-female.
I'm not anti-feminist per se. I mean, I think the idea that the world would benefit from the movement of talent from both sexes into the workplace as rapidly as possible is something that anyone with any sense should share, given the the rarity of talent and the necessity for utilizing it.
A horrible person, racist, all these things, and he's none of these things.
The presence of Nazis and white supremacists assaulting people at your protest, do you have any comment on that?
Yeah, I don't like Nazis.
He's just a professor that knows how to talk. And people like him because he talks to men about taking responsibility. And he says the reason so many men watch him is because he's on YouTube.
I wasn't specifically aiming this message at young men to begin with. It just kind of turned out that way.
And it's mostly, you admit, it's mostly men listening. I mean,
it
90% of your audience is a male,
well, it's
right?
about 80% on YouTube, which is YouTube is a male domain primarily. So it's hard to tell how much of it is because YouTube is male and how much of it is because of what I'm saying.
When he got started on YouTube, it was about 80% dominated by men. And he talks about responsibility, and men have been cast to the side, particularly in the universities. You know, they've been lowered in their status. That's what creates betas versus alphas.
Beta!
You know, you can't think that way. You shouldn't think that way. You're thinking yourself as, I don't want to make victims out of anybody, but therefore I want to also be a victim. And forget that. You just move on and don't apologize.
If you haven't done anything wrong, do not apologize.
That is well, good. But you like that?
Yes.
Okay.
Very much.
We might watch another one here. Okay. And these are easy to
some notable person has said there's no such thing as a free lunch. And if you appreciate what we do and what we're trying to do and our spin on things, we're not trying to be, the final authority on much of anything. But we've got some comments to make about lots of things. Then the cost for you is to subscribe. Now, that isn't going to cost you immediately in dollars and cents. It will only cost you as you may later on buy something that the advertisers put on there. But that's what we're looking for. We're looking to get enough subscribers so that we can get some advertisers and make a little money. And we'd appreciate your liking us and subscribing. Thank you.